So if that part of the brain is underdeveloped, then you're setting a pattern for that child's life. And what they found is that the prefrontal cortex in people who regularly meditate has greater density.
But what exactly is stress? Well, put very simply, stress can be anything that happens within us or outside of us that triggers inaccurate responses of the fight, flight and freeze response, all of those we've been talking about over the last 2 days. Once again, it's important to note that short-term stress and consequently the short-term accurate triggering of these systems is no bad thing. In fact, it saves lives. The stress that's damaging is the stress that's triggered inaccurately or for a long period of time, or maybe even both. So what can you do if you feel stressed in a way that's constantly and inaccurately triggering the fight, flight or freeze response in your body? Well, Austin has a technique to share with you now that he developed to help people who suffer from stress find clarity and calmness. It's called prefrontal cortex tapping. Austin.
Thank you, Jo. Yes, it's this idea really had its origins in the fact that they've done a load of research, particularly in America, over a 30-year period. And one of the things they've discovered is that if you have a baby who is in a disruptive environment for the first 6 weeks, they were quite specific about this, first 6 weeks of their life, so mum's going through difficulties, and the baby's attuned to mum's facial muscles, and the baby is attuned to mum's tonalities. Of course, other voices, but it's that connection with mum. So what they've discovered is that the baby is so attuned to what's happening in terms of the facial muscles and the tonality of mum's voice, is that they know if something isn't correct. So mum might be, I don't know, going through a depressive period, and she's pretending that everything in the world, oh, there's a sweet baby or whatever, then the baby has the ability to read that there's an error there somewhere. So it's picking up on this stress. And they've found that there are certain conditions where the baby's prefrontal cortex can be underdeveloped, and sometimes when in excess of 50%. Now, of course, if the cortex, we'll shorten it to cortex, is underdeveloped, it doesn't mean, I think I mentioned this yesterday, it doesn't mean that the person is stupid or silly. It has nothing to do with that. It means that they'll be more prone to stress because they don't have that prefrontal cortex that helps us to manage our lives, reason and logic, executive decision, and even being able to recognize our own identity. So if that part of the brain is underdeveloped, then you're setting a pattern for that child's life, where they may well be more prone to stress and anxiety. Also, again, much research has been done on people who constantly meditate. And what they found is that the prefrontal cortex in people who regularly meditate has greater density. Now that's really interesting, because that's what we all will benefit from, is if we stimulate the prefrontal cortex to create more density. But when you're in that stress mode, that's your pattern. As I said, maybe you've learnt that pattern very early on in your life, or you're continuing the pattern by leading a stressful life. Then you're not giving the prefrontal cortex enough time to increase its density. So if you think that this research, which has been done many times, in people who meditate regularly have a greater density, so they're calmer, generally speaking. Now, I looked at this and I thought, okay, well, there's situations where people don't have an opportunity to meditate. They may need to do something very quickly. And so I came up with prefrontal cortex tapping. Now, I'd like you to be aware that it's different from EFT, meridian tapping, in that the word structures are different. We are constantly saying that in the tapping, normal tapping round, that we keep the word constructions negative, and that's true. But in prefrontal cortex tapping, we go through a specific structure which is positive. And that's because it's like an exercise for the brain. That's what it is, an exercise. And it's a very calming process. And Dawn and I have been using this for years, and it always chills people, doesn't it?
Always, without fail, always.
It's just the most amazing process, and it's very simple, and you can learn it very rapidly, and that's what we're going to do.